Alexander Harrington stumbled out of the boardroom, his polished loafers catching on the edge of the carpet as a wave of dizziness crashed over him. The sleek conference table and the panoramic view of Stamford, Connecticut's skyline blurred into a haze, the world tilting like a ship caught in a storm. He gripped the doorframe, knuckles whitening, his breath shallow as he fought to steady himself. His assistant, Lena, rushed to his side, her sharp eyes scanning his face. "Mr. Harrington, are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Alexander waved her off, forcing a tight smile. "Just need some air," he muttered, his tone clipped to mask his chest's tremor. But the truth gnawed at him, a relentless beast. This wasn't the first time. These spells haunted him for weeks, lurches in his chest, fog clouding his mind, moments where reality seemed to slip through his fingers. He dismissed them as stress, the crushing weight of running a hotel empire that spanned continents. But they were growing worse, more frequent, more vicious. "Call Dr. Reynolds," he told Lena, his voice low, almost a growl, to ensure the board members lingering in the hallway wouldn't overhear. They'd pounce on any sign of weakness, and Alexander Harrington, billionaire hotel magnate at 38, couldn't afford that. Not now, not ever. Lena nodded, already dialing as Alexander steadied himself and headed for the elevator. His reflection in the mirrored doors showed an invincible man. Tailored navy suit, sharp jawline, piercing green eyes that could silence a room. But inside, he felt like a clock winding down, each tick a reminder of something he couldn't name. The private hospital in Stamford was a fortress of glass and steel, its quiet corridors reserved for the elite. Alexander had been here 3 months ago when the dizzy spells first struck. Back then, Dr. Reynolds had run tests, prescribed rest, and sent him home with vague reassurances. Probably just exhaustion, he'd said. His tone too casual for Alexander's liking. But today, as Alexander sat on the edge of a leather chair in the consultation room, the air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken weight. The faint hum of medical equipment buzzed like a warning in the sterile silence. Dr. Reynolds entered, his face a mask of professionalism, but his eyes betrayed unease. He held a tablet, swiping through charts Alexander couldn't see. Alexander, he began, his voice steady but deliberate. "We've got the results from your latest scans." He paused, and Alexander's stomach twisted. He'd built a fortune by reading people, and that pause screamed bad news. "It's a degenerative condition affecting your nervous system," Dr. Reynolds continued, his words measured. "Rare, aggressive. I'm sorry, but you've got 3 years, maybe less." The diagnosis hit like a punch to the chest, stealing Alexander's breath. His mind raced, grappling with the impossible. 3 years. At 38, he was in his prime, untouchable. Or so he'd thought. His empire stretched across continents, his name synonymous with power, wealth, and control. Yet here he was, reduced to a ticking clock, a man staring at his own mortality. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the question pressing against his ribs. Dr. Reynolds nodded, his expression softening. "I've triple-checked. The symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, are consistent. We can manage the progression, but there's no cure." Alexander leaned back, staring at the ceiling, his mind a storm of regret and fear. He'd always assumed he had time to build more hotels, outmaneuver rivals, and live. But now, the one thing that cut deeper than his own mortality was the absence of an heir. No one to carry his name, his legacy. His half-brother Victor flashed in his mind, a charming, reckless man who'd inherit everything if Alexander didn't act. Victor, who'd squander it all on bad deals and worse women. The thought made Alexander's jaw clench, his hands curling into fists. "Options," he said, his tone sharp, pulling himself back to the present. "What can I do?" Dr. Reynolds hesitated, his fingers tapping the tablet. "Medication to slow it down. Therapy to manage symptoms. But, Alexander, you need to start thinking about your priorities. What matters most?" Alexander's gaze drifted to the window, where Stamford's skyline gleamed under the afternoon sun. What mattered most? He'd spent his life chasing wealth, power, control, building an empire that defined him. But now, facing the end, he saw the gaping hole in his world. No family, no child, no one to pass it all to. "I need an heir," he said, almost to himself, the words heavy with resolve. Dr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "That's a big decision. You'd need to move fast, and it's not just about finding someone. It's about trust, compatibility." "I'll handle it," Alexander cut in, his voice regaining its edge. He stood, smoothing his suit, masking the tremor in his hands. "Thanks, Doc. Keep this between us." He didn't wait for a response, striding out of the room, his mind already spinning with plans. He'd find someone to bear his child and secure his legacy before time ran out. The weight of the diagnosis clung to him like damp air, but it also lit a fire. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for something to outlast him. Back at his penthouse that evening, Alexander stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The city sprawled below, alive and indifferent to his private collapse. The dizziness had subsided, but Dr. Reynolds' words echoed, each syllable a blade. 3 years. He'd always prided himself on control, over deals, over people, over his world. But this was a beast he couldn't tame. He sank into a leather armchair, his thoughts drifting to the past. His father's death when he was a teenager had left him to fend for himself, clawing his way to the top. Victor's betrayal years later, when he sabotaged Alexander's first hotel deal, had hardened him further. Family had always been a battleground, a source of pain rather than solace. Yet now the idea of creating one consumed him. He didn't just want an heir, he wanted meaning, something to anchor him against the void of his diagnosis. His phone buzzed, Lena checking in. "You need anything, Mr. Harrington?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. "I'm fine," he lied, his tone clipped. "Cancel my meetings tomorrow. I need time." He hung up before she could press further. Time. The word mocked him. He'd spent years building an empire. But what was it worth if it crumbled to dust with him? His gaze fell on a framed photo on his desk, a rare shot of him and his mother laughing on a beach when he was 10. A memory of warmth, of a life before ambition consumed him. He'd find someone strong, someone worthy, and he'd do it on his terms. His phone buzzed again. Lena, reminding him of tonight's charity event at the Harborview Hotel, one of his own properties. He'd almost canceled, the thought of plastering on a smile for Stamford's elite exhausting. But staying alone with his thoughts felt worse, a descent into the abyss of his own mortality. Besides, he needed a distraction, a spark, something to pull him from the void. He straightened his tie, adjusted his cufflinks, and headed out, unaware that the night would change his life. At the Harborview, the ballroom hummed with laughter and clinking glasses, a sea of tailored suits and shimmering gowns. Alexander moved through the crowd, his presence commanding despite the faint tremor in his hands. He nodded at familiar faces, politicians, investors, socialites, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying Dr. Reynolds' words, the image of his mother's photo, the urgency of his mission, an heir. He scanned the room, unsure what he was looking for, but certain he'd know when he saw it. Then, a crash. A tray of wine glasses hit the floor, the sharp sound cutting through the chatter. Red wine splashed across Alexander's crisp white shirt, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A young woman stood frozen, her cheeks flushed, her apron slightly askew. She was a waitress, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her hazel eyes wide with panic. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she stammered, dropping to her knees to gather the shattered glass. "I didn't see you. I was turning." "Relax," Alexander said, his voice calm, almost amused as he crouched beside her. The crowd watched, expecting the billionaire to snap, to demand her dismissal. But his gaze locked on her, intrigued by the raw honesty in her eyes, the way her hands trembled but kept moving, fixing her mistake without groveling. Something about her felt real, starkly contrasting the polished, calculating world around him. "It's just a shirt," he added, his lips twitching into a half-smile as he handed her a fallen napkin. Their fingers brushed for a split second, the contact sending an unexpected jolt through him, sharp and disarming. She blinked up at him, her embarrassment giving way to defiance. "You're not mad? Most guys in your tax bracket would be screaming for my head." Alexander chuckled, a low, genuine sound that surprised even him. "Most guys in my tax bracket don't know how to laugh at themselves." He stood, offering her a hand. "What's your name?" "Sophia Ellis," she said, hesitating before taking his hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused, a testament to a life of hard work. "And I really am sorry. I'll pay for the dry cleaning." "Forget it, Sophia," he said, her name rolling off his tongue like a discovery. "Keep the glasses off the floor, and we're even." She nodded, a spark of gratitude and a challenge in her eyes, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust his kindness. She hurried back to the kitchen, leaving Alexander staring after her, the crowd's chatter resuming like a tide swallowing the moment. The ballroom at the Harborview Hotel pulsed with life, a glittering sea of tailored suits and shimmering gowns under the soft glow of chandeliers. Alexander Harrington moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his commanding presence drawing nods and smiles from Stamford's elite. Politicians, investors, socialites. Yet, beneath his polished exterior, a faint tremor lingered in his hands, a reminder of the dizzy spells that had plagued him for weeks. His mind churned, replaying Dr. Reynolds' grim diagnosis, 3 years, maybe less. The weight of his mortality pressed against him, a shadow that no amount of wealth or power could dispel. He scanned the room, unsure what he was searching for, but driven by an instinct that it would reveal itself. A spark, a purpose, something to anchor him against the ticking clock. The crash came suddenly, sharp and jarring. A tray of wineglasses hit the floor, the sound slicing through the hum of laughter and clinking crystal. Red wine splashed across Alexander's crisp white shirt, staining it like blood against snow. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, and all eyes turned to the source. A young waitress, her cheeks flushed with panic, her apron slightly askew. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her hazel eyes widened in horror as she dropped to her knees, scrambling to gather the shattered glass. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice trembling but resolute. "I didn't see you. I was turning." "Relax," Alexander said, his tone calm, almost amused as he crouched beside her. The crowd held its breath, expecting the billionaire to lash out, to demand her dismissal. But something about her held him captive, the raw honesty in her eyes, the way her hands shook yet moved with purpose, cleaning her mistake without groveling. She felt real, unpolished, alive in a world of calculated smiles and hidden agendas. "It's just a shirt," he added, his lips twitching into a half-smile as he handed her a fallen napkin. Their fingers brushed for a fleeting moment, and a jolt shot through him, unexpected and disarming, like a spark in a darkened room. She blinked up at him, her embarrassment shifting to defiance. "You're not mad? Most guys in your tax bracket would be screaming for my head." Her bluntness caught him off guard, and Alexander chuckled, a low, genuine sound that surprised even him. "Most guys in my tax bracket don't know how to laugh at themselves," he replied, standing and offering her a hand. "What's your name?" "Sophia Ellis," she said, hesitating before taking his hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused, starkly contrasting the delicate hands of the socialites around them. "And I really am sorry. I'll pay for the dry cleaning." "Forget it, Sophia," he said, her name rolling off his tongue like a discovery, unfamiliar yet right. "Keep the glasses off the floor, and we're even." She nodded, a spark of gratitude flickering in her eyes, but also a challenge, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust his kindness. She hurried back to the kitchen, her figure disappearing behind a swinging door, leaving Alexander staring after her as the crowd's chatter resumed, swallowing the moment like a tide. He retreated to a quieter corner of the ballroom, the stained shirt drawing curious glances. His assistant, Lena, appeared, her tablet glowing with updates. "You want me to get you a new shirt, Mr. Harrington, or have that waitress dealt with?" she asked, her tone professional but edged with concern. "No," he said sharply, then softened. "She's fine, leave it." Lena raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Alexander's thoughts were already elsewhere, replaying Sophia's words, her unpolished honesty, the fire in her gaze. She wasn't like the women who fawned over him. Their smiles were calculated and their motives were transparent. Sophia was different, raw, unguarded, real. He sipped his whiskey, the burn grounding him as he watched her across the room. She moved purposefully, balancing trays and dodging guests, her focus unbroken despite the earlier mishap. His mind churned. An heir. He'd been thinking of contracts, surrogates, and clinical arrangements to secure his legacy before his time ran out. But Sophia, she was a possibility he hadn't considered. Not just for her fire, but for the way she made him feel alive, if only for a moment. The diagnosis loomed, a shadow over every thought, but she was a spark in the dark, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Not since before the dizzy spells, before the empire consumed him, before the prognosis turned his world to ash. "Mr. Harrington." A voice cut through his thoughts, slick and mocking. It was Victor, his half-brother, sauntering over with a smirk. His dark hair was slicked back, his suit just a touch too flashy for the room. "Heard you had a little wine bath. Losing your touch, brother?" Alexander's jaw tightened, his hand clenching around his glass. Victor's presence always carried a barb, a reminder of their fractured past, his betrayal years ago when he sabotaged Alexander's first hotel deal, a wound that still festered. "What do you want, Victor?" Alexander asked, his voice cold, masking the faint dizziness threatening to resurface. Victor said, "Just checking on my favorite sibling," his tone dripping with mock concern. "You look pale. Rough day?" Alexander's grip tightened, the glass cool against his palm. Victor didn't know about the diagnosis. Nobody did. But his taunts hit too close, like a predator sensing blood. "Go charm someone who cares," Alexander said, his tone icy. "I'm busy." Victor's eyes narrowed, catching the edge in Alexander's voice. "Busy brooding or planning your next conquest?" He glanced toward Sophia, who was clearing a table nearby, her movements swift and focused. "She's cute, but not your usual type. Too ordinary." Alexander's protective instinct flared, his gaze following Victor's. "Stay out of it," he said, his voice low, dangerous. Victor laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender before slipping back into the crowd, his smirk lingering like poison. Alexander's eyes found Sophia again. She was laughing now, a soft sound as she spoke to another waitress, her face lighting up in a way that made his chest ache. He didn't know her story but wanted to, needed to. The diagnosis cast a shadow over every thought, but Sophia was a beacon, a possibility he hadn't dared imagine. Maybe she wasn't the answer to his legacy, but she was something, someone who made time feel less like a thief. As the event wound down, Alexander lingered, his decision crystallizing. He'd find a way to see her again, not tonight, not with the crowd watching, but soon. Sophia wasn't just a distraction, she was a piece of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. By morning, he sat in his penthouse office, a sleek space of glass and steel overlooking Stamford's waterfront. Marcus's investigator had worked overnight, and a slim folder now sat on his desk. Sophia Ellis, 26, orphaned at 19, is raising her 16-year-old sister, Emma, in a cramped apartment on Stamford's less polished east side. She worked double shifts at a diner and picked up catering gigs like last night's charity event to keep them afloat. No criminal record, no scandals, just a quiet life of grit and sacrifice. Alexander traced a finger over her name, picturing her hazel eyes, her calloused hands. Honorable, Marcus had written. Hard-working, proud. Alexander's lips twitched. She was perfect, not just for an heir, but for him. The diagnosis had stripped away his illusions of invincibility, leaving him raw, desperate to leave something behind. Sophia could be something that wasn't just about a contract. The pull he'd felt last night, that jolt when their hands brushed, was dangerous, unexpected, and he couldn't shake it. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, but now, with time slipping away, he wanted more than a transaction. He wanted her. Alexander Harrington sat in the dim glow of his penthouse office, the city of Stamford sprawling beneath him like a map of his conquests. The sleek glass desk before him held a single, slim folder, its contents a revelation that both grounded and unsettled him. Sophia Ellis. Her name echoed in his mind, conjuring the image of her hazel eyes, wide with panic yet fierce with defiance, and the calloused hand that had brushed his in the chaos of the spilled wine. The folder, delivered by his investigator Marcus, painted a vivid picture: 26, orphaned at 19, raising her 16-year-old sister Emma in a cramped apartment on Stamford's east side. Double shifts at a diner, catering gigs to make ends meet, a life of relentless grit. No scandals, no shadows, just honor, hard work, pride. Alexander traced a finger over her name, his lips twitching into a faint smile. She was perfect, not just for the heir he needed to secure his legacy, but for him, a spark in the darkness of his diagnosis. The weight of Dr. Reynolds' words, 3 years, maybe less, clung to him like damp air, a constant reminder of the degenerative condition eroding his nervous system. It had stripped away his illusions of invincibility, leaving him raw, desperate to leave something behind. But Sophia's fire, her unpolished honesty, had ignited something deeper, a longing he hadn't felt in years, not since before the dizzy spells, before his empire consumed him, before the prognosis turned his world to ash. The memory of their brief touch at the Harborview Hotel lingered, a jolt that had pierced his carefully constructed walls. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, guarding his heart against betrayal. But now, with time slipping away, he wanted more than a transaction. He wanted her. His thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of his phone. Lena, his assistant, her voice laced with concern. "Everything all right, Mr. Harrington? You've been quiet since the event." "I'm fine," he lied, his tone clipped as he stood, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights flickered, indifferent to his turmoil. "Cancel my morning calls, I need to think." He hung up before she could press further, his gaze falling back to the folder. Sophia Ellis. She wasn't just a solution to his legacy. She was a possibility he hadn't dared imagine. A woman who made him feel alive, if only for a moment. The charity event had shifted something in him. Victor's taunts, his half-brother's mocking smirk, had stirred old wounds, memories of betrayal when Victor sabotaged Alexander's first hotel deal, nearly costing him everything. Family had always been a battleground, a source of pain rather than solace. Yet Sophia, with her raw authenticity, felt like a counterpoint to that history. Her defiance, her refusal to cower despite her mistake, had drawn him in. She wasn't like the socialites who fawned over him. Their motives were transparent. She was real, and that reality was dangerous, intoxicating. Determined to know more, Alexander had set Marcus on her trail the moment he left the Harborview. The investigator's efficiency was unmatched, and the folder confirmed what Alexander's instincts had whispered. Sophia was no ordinary woman. She'd faced loss and hardship, yet carried herself with a strength that mirrored his own. Her life was a testament to sacrifice, raising Emma, scraping by, never breaking. Honorable, Marcus had noted. Proud Alexander's smile widened. She was the answer to the void his diagnosis had exposed, but the pull he felt wasn't just about securing an heir. It was about her, the way she'd challenged him, the way her touch had sparked something he couldn't ignore. He sank into his leather armchair, the whiskey glass still untouched from the night before. The diagnosis loomed, a shadow over every thought, but Sophia was a beacon, a flicker of hope in the dark. He closed his eyes, replaying their encounter, her flushed cheeks, her trembling hands, the way she'd stood her ground. "You're not mad? Most guys in your tax bracket would be screaming for my head." Her words had disarmed him, her honesty a rare gift in his world of deception. He'd meant it when he said it was just a shirt, but it was more than that. It was the moment he saw her, truly saw her. The decision crystallized as dawn painted the skyline in hues of gold. He'd find her, not through contracts or cold arrangements, but in person. He needed to know who she was beyond the file, to understand the woman who'd stirred something he thought long buried. His empire demanded his attention, but for the first time, it felt secondary. The clock was ticking, and Sophia Ellis was his next move. That afternoon, Alexander stepped into Rosie's diner, a faded relic of Stamford's less polished side. The air smelled of coffee and grease, the formica tables chipped but clean. Sophia was behind the counter, balancing plates and a smile for an elderly regular, her movements graceful despite the chaos. She hadn't seen him yet, and Alexander paused in the doorway, struck by her warmth, a stark contrast to the sterile world he inhabited. He adjusted his tie, a rare flicker of nerves sparking in his gut, and stepped inside. "Sophia," he said, his voice cutting through the diner's hum. She turned, her eyes widening, then narrowing with suspicion. "You again," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "If you're here about the shirt, I said I'd pay for it." "It's not about the shirt," Alexander replied, sliding onto a stool at the counter, ignoring the curious glances from other patrons. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Her gaze flicked to the clock, her posture guarded. "My break's in 10 minutes. Are you buying coffee or just taking up space?" He smirked. "Coffee, black." 10 minutes later, they sat in a quiet corner booth, the diner's noise a low buzz. Sophia sipped her water, her eyes wary. "So, what's this about? You don't strike me as the diner type." Alexander leaned forward, his green eyes locking onto hers. "I looked into you, Sophia. I know about your sister, your parents, and the double shifts. You're fighting to keep your head above water." Her face hardened, a flash of anger in her eyes. "You had no right to dig into my life. What do you want, Harrington?" "I want to make you an offer," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "Marry me. Give me a child, an heir. In return, I'll secure your future and Emma's. College, a home, anything you need, forever." Sophia froze, her glass halfway to her lips, the words hanging between them like a thunderclap. "You're serious," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're actually serious." "I don't joke about things like this," Alexander replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm running out of time, Sophia. I need someone I can trust. Someone real. That's you." She laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You don't even know me. I spilled wine on you, and now you want me to be your wife? Do you have a kid? This isn't a fairy tale, Alexander. This is crazy." "Maybe," he admitted, leaning closer, his voice softening, "but you're drowning, Sophia. I see it in your eyes, the way you carry the weight of everything. I can change that. You give me an heir and I give you freedom. Emma gets a future, you both do." Her hands trembled and she set her glass down hard. "You think you can just buy me? I'm not a transaction." "That's not what this is," Alexander said, his tone earnest. "I saw you last night, your fire, your honesty. You're not like anyone I've met. I don't just want an heir, I want you." Her breath caught, their eyes locking, the air between them electric. She looked away, her fingers twisting a napkin. "You don't know what you're asking. I've got Emma to think about. She's all I have." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I'm offering this. For her, for you. I'm not asking for love, Sophia. I'm asking for a partnership. But I won't lie. You felt something last night. Same as I did." Her cheeks flushed and she didn't deny it. The memory of their brief touch, the way his smile had disarmed her, lingered like a bruise. She stood, pacing a step. "This is insane. I can't just agree to this. I need time." "Take it," Alexander said, standing too, his presence steady but not overbearing. "But don't take too long. I'll be at the Harborview tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Meet me if you're in." She stared at him, her mind a storm of fear, temptation, and something deeper, an ache she couldn't name. "And if I say no?" "Then you say no," he said, his voice low, almost tender. "But I don't think you will." He left her there, the bell above the diner's door jingling as he stepped into the sunlight. Sophia sank back into the booth, her heart racing. His offer was madness, but the thought of Emma's future, college, safety, a life beyond scraping by, was a lifeline she couldn't ignore. And then there was Alexander himself. His intensity, his unexpected warmth, the way his green eyes seemed to see through her. She'd felt it, that pull. and it scared her as much as it thrilled her. As she returned to her shift, his words followed her, a shadow that felt strangely like hope. Tomorrow night loomed as a crossroads she wasn't ready to face, but couldn't turn away from. Alexander Harrington stood outside Rosie's diner, the faded neon sign flickering in the late afternoon sun. The air carried the scent of coffee and grease, a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of his penthouse. His heart pounded, not from the dizzy spells that had haunted him for weeks, but from a rare flicker of nerves. Sophia Ellis. Her name had lingered in his mind since their encounter at the Harborview Hotel, her hazel eyes and defiant spark refusing to fade. The slim folder from Marcus, his investigator, had revealed her life: 26, orphaned, raising her sister Emma on double shifts and sheer will. She was more than a solution to his need for an heir. She was a fire that warmed the cold edges of his world, a world now shadowed by Dr. Reynolds' diagnosis: 3 years, maybe less. He adjusted his tie, squared his shoulders, and stepped inside, ready to take a risk he'd never imagined. The diner buzzed with the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation. Sophia moved behind the counter, balancing a tray of coffee mugs with a grace that belied the chaos around her. She flashed a smile at an elderly regular, her warmth cutting through the diner's worn charm. She hadn't seen him yet, and Alexander paused in the doorway, struck by how she carried herself. Tired but unbroken, a beacon in his storm of mortality. He cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the din. "Sophia." She turned, her eyes widening, then narrowing with suspicion. "You again," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "If you're here about the shirt, I said I'd pay for it." Her tone was sharp, but a flicker of curiosity danced in her gaze. "It's not about the shirt," Alexander replied, sliding onto a stool at the counter, ignoring the curious glances from other patrons. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Her gaze flicked to the clock, her posture guarded. "My break's in 10 minutes. Are you buying coffee, or just taking up space?" He smirked, a rare lightness easing the weight in his chest. "Coffee. Black." 10 minutes later, they sat in a quiet corner booth, the diner's noise a low buzz in the background. Sophia sipped her water, her hazel eyes wary, studying him like a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. "So, what's this about? You don't strike me as the diner type." Alexander leaned forward, his green eyes locking onto hers, steady despite the pulse hammering in his veins. "I looked into you, Sophia. I know about your sister, your parents, and the double shifts. You're fighting to keep your head above water." Her face hardened, a flash of anger sparking in her eyes. "You had no right to dig into my life. What do you want, Harrington?" Her voice was low, cutting, but he didn't flinch. "I want to make you an offer," he said, his tone steady, each word deliberate. "Marry me. Give me a child, an heir. In return, I'll secure your future and Emma's. College, a home, anything you need, forever." The words hung between them, heavy and surreal, like a thunderclap in the quiet booth. Sophia froze, her glass halfway to her lips, her breath catching. "You're serious?" she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're actually serious?" "I don't joke about things like this," Alexander replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm running out of time, Sophia. I need someone I can trust, someone real. That's you." She laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound that echoed in the small space. "You don't even know me. I spilled wine on you, and now you want me to be your wife? Do you have a kid? This isn't a fairy tale, Alexander. This is crazy." "Maybe," he admitted, leaning closer, his voice softening, a rare vulnerability creeping in. "But you're drowning, Sophia. I see it in your eyes, the way you carry the weight of everything. I can change that. You give me an heir, and I give you freedom. Emma gets a future. You both do." Her hands trembled, and she set her glass down hard, the clink sharp against the table. "You think you can just buy me? I'm not a transaction." Her voice was fierce, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt, a crack in her armor. "That's not what this is," Alexander said, his tone earnest, almost pleading. "I saw you last night, your fire, your honesty. You're not like anyone I've met. I don't just want an heir, I want you." Her breath caught, their eyes locking, the air between them crackling with unspoken tension. The memory of their brief touch at the Harborview, The jolt when their fingers brushed lingered like a pulse. She looked away, her fingers twisting a napkin into knots. "You don't know what you're asking. I've got Emma to think about. She's all I have." "I know," he said quietly, his voice steady but gentle. "That's why I'm offering this, for her, for you. I'm not asking for love, Sophia. I'm asking for a partnership. But I won't lie, you felt something last night, same as I did." Her cheeks flushed, and she didn't deny it. The way his smile had disarmed her, the warmth in his gaze despite his billionaire's mask, had left a mark she couldn't ignore. She stood, pacing a step, her hands fidgeting. "This is insane. I can't just agree to this. I need time." "Take it," Alexander said, standing too, his presence steady but not overbearing. "But don't take too long. I'll be at the Harbor View tomorrow night, at 8 o'clock. Meet me if you're in." She stared at him, her mind a storm of fear, temptation, and something deeper, an ache she couldn't name. "And if I say no?" "Then you say no," he said, his voice low, almost tender, a softness that surprised them both. "But I don't think you will." He turned, leaving her in the booth, the bell above the diner's door jingling as he stepped into the sunlight. Sophia sank back into the seat, her heart racing, her thoughts a tangle of disbelief and possibility. His offer was madness, a billionaire's whim born of desperation. Yet, the thought of Emma's future, college paid for, a home free of leaks and late bills, a life beyond scraping by, was a lifeline she couldn't dismiss. And then there was Alexander himself. His intensity, his unexpected warmth, the way his green eyes seemed to see through her defenses. She'd felt it, that pull, and it scared her as much as it thrilled her. It wasn't just the promise of security. It was the way he'd looked at her, like she was more than a waitress, more than a means to an end. She returned to her shift, pouring coffee with mechanical precision. But her mind was elsewhere. The diner's clamor faded, replaced by the echo of his words. "I don't just want an heir. I want you." Each order she took, each smile she forced, felt like a step toward a decision she wasn't ready to make. Emma's face flashed in her mind, her sister's dreams of art school, her quiet resilience despite their struggles. Sophia had sacrificed everything to keep her safe, to give her a chance. Alexander's offer could change that, could lift the weight she'd carried for years. But at what cost? To tie herself to a man she barely knew, to step into a world that might chew her up. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the diner, Sophia glanced at the clock. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, Harbor View Hotel. A crossroads loomed, one that could rewrite her life and Emma's. She wiped down the counter, her hands steady but her heart in turmoil. Alexander's presence lingered, a shadow that felt strangely like hope. She didn't know if she could trust him, didn't know if she could trust herself. But the spark between them, that fleeting jolt, was undeniable. As she locked up the diner, the city's lights flickering beyond, she felt the weight of a choice that could change everything. Sophia Ellis stood in the small, elegant chapel on the outskirts of Stamford, her simple ivory dress feeling foreign against her skin. The mirror in the bridal suite reflected a woman she barely recognized. No apron, no tired eyes, just a bride about to marry a billionaire. 3 weeks had passed since Alexander Harrington's audacious proposal in Rosie's diner. A whirlwind of contracts, lawyers, and planning driven by his urgency. A ticking clock he believed was his fate. The chapel's wooden pews held a handful of guests, Alexander's associates, and a few of Sophia's co-workers from the diner. Her sister Emma sat in the front row, her new dress a gift from Alexander, her face a mix of awe and worry. Sophia's heart ached at the sight of her sister, the reason she'd said yes to this improbable union. As she stepped toward the altar, her eyes caught Victor, Alexander's half-brother, leaning against a back pew. His smirk was sharp as a blade, his dark eyes glinting with disdain. Whispers of a gold digger had already reached her ears, his venom seeping into the murmurs of the guests. Alexander waited at the altar, his tailored black suit accentuating his broad shoulders and commanding presence. His green eyes locked onto hers, steady but unreadable, sending a shiver down her spine. She reached him, her hands cold, and he took one, his grip firm, grounding. The officiant's words blurred, vows, promises, forever. But Alexander's hand never left her waist, a quiet claim that felt both protective and possessive. Sophia's pulse raced, not just from nerves but from the heat of his touch, a reminder of the jolt she'd felt in the diner, a pull she couldn't shake. Victor's sneer burned in her peripheral vision, a storm cloud in the intimate ceremony. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "Ignore him," he murmured, his voice low, meant only for her. "He's nothing." The words were a shield, but they didn't erase the tension coiling in her chest. She nodded, forcing a smile as he kissed her, a brief, deliberate press of lips that sent a spark through her despite its restraint. The small crowd clapped, but Victor's slow, mocking applause cut through, his eyes glinting with malice. The reception, held in a private room at the Harborview Hotel, was elegant. White linens, soft lighting, a view of Stamford's waterfront, but it felt like a stage. Every guest watched Sophia, their gazes heavy with judgment. She clung to her champagne flute, the bubbles doing little to ease her overwhelm. Alexander stayed close, his hand resting lightly on her waist, a constant anchor. But his warmth from the ceremony had cooled, his jaw tight as he scanned the room. "This is a deal, Sophia," he said quietly, catching her gaze as they stood near the dessert table. "Nothing more. Don't expect hearts and flowers." His words stung, sharper than she'd expected. "I don't," she shot back, her voice low but firm. "I'm here for Emma, same as you're here for your legacy. Let's not pretend otherwise." Her defiance surprised her, but Alexander's lips twitched, a flicker of respect in his eyes before he turned to greet a guest. Sophia sipped her champagne, her mind spinning. She'd known this was a transaction, but his coldness clashed with the memory of his warmth in the diner, the way he'd looked at her like she was more than a means to an end. Was he pushing her away to protect himself, or was this who he truly was? She glanced at Emma, laughing with a caterer she recognized from Rosie's, and her resolve hardened. This was for her sister, not for fairy tales. Victor approached, a glass of whiskey in hand, his smile oily and mocking. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, the title dripping with scorn. "Quite the leap from pouring coffee. Hope you're ready for the spotlight." Sophia's grip tightened on her flute, her voice sharp. "I'm ready for whatever comes, but you look like you're trying too hard to matter." His smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "Careful, sweetheart. You're playing in a world you don't understand." Alexander appeared before she could respond, his hand firm on her waist. "Victor," he said, his voice a low warning, "find someone else to bother." Victor raised his glass, smirking. "Just welcoming the new family, brother. She's charming." He sauntered off, but his words lingered, a poison seeping into the air. Sophia turned to Alexander, her voice barely above a whisper. "He thinks I'm after your money." "Half the room probably does. Let them," Alexander said. His tone clipped, but his eyes softened as they met hers. "You know why you're here, so do I." He paused, his thumb brushing her waist, a fleeting gesture that felt more intimate than his kiss at the altar. "You're stronger than they think, Sophia." Her breath caught, the warmth of his words clashing with his earlier coldness. She wanted to ask what he meant, to unravel the man behind the deal, but a guest interrupted, pulling him away. Sophia stood alone, the weight of her new life pressing down. She was Mrs. Harrington now, but the title felt like a costume, one she wasn't sure she could wear. As the night wound down, she stepped onto the balcony, the cool air a relief against her flushed skin. The waterfront shimmered below, its dark waves mirroring the turmoil within her. Alexander joined her, his presence quiet but steady. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost human. "I don't know," she admitted, staring at the water's glint. It's a lot. And you say it's just a deal, but then you look at me like..." She trailed off, unsure how to finish. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "Like what?" "Like you see me," she said, her voice barely audible. "Not just the deal." He didn't answer, but his hand found hers, a silent tether in the night. His thumb brushed her knuckles, soft and deliberate, betraying a crack in his armor. Sophia's heart pounded, torn between the safety of their agreement and the reckless pull of something deeper. Inside, the reception had dwindled, leaving only a few stragglers and the soft clink of glasses being cleared. Alexander led her back into the warmth of the hotel, his hand still on hers, guiding her to the private elevator that whisked them to his penthouse suite. The doors closed, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. Sophia's pulse raced, the weight of her new title, Mrs. Harrington, pressing against the memory of his cold words. This is a deal, nothing more. Yet his touch told a different story, and she wasn't sure which to believe. In the penthouse, the city's lights spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting shadows across the sleek furniture. Alexander released her hand, moving to pour a glass of water, his movements precise but strained. "You should rest," he said, his voice clipped, as if trying to rebuild the distance between them. "It's been a long day." Sophia watched him, her eyes tracing the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided her gaze. "You're the one who looks like he needs rest," she said, stepping closer. "You're pale, Alexander. Are you okay?" He froze, his hand tightening around the glass. "I'm fine," he said, but the lie was brittle, his face taut with a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Sophia Ellis stood in the penthouse suite, the city lights of Stamford casting a silver glow across the sleek furniture. The private elevator's soft ding still echoed in her ears, sealing her in this new reality as Mrs. Alexander Harrington. Her ivory dress clung to her, a symbol of the whirlwind marriage born of his desperate proposal 3 weeks ago. Alexander's words from the reception, "This is a deal, nothing more," stung like a fresh wound, yet his touch on the balcony, the way his thumb brushed her knuckles, told a different story. She watched him now, pouring a glass of water with precise, strained movements, his broad shoulders tense under his tailored shirt. The air between them crackled, heavy with unspoken truths. "You should rest," he said, his voice clipped, as if rebuilding the walls he'd let slip on the balcony. "It's been a long day." Sophia's eyes traced the tension in his frame, the way he avoided her gaze. "You're the one who looks like he needs rest," she said, stepping closer, her voice soft but firm. "You're pale, Alexander. Are you okay?" He froze, his hand tightening around the glass, the lie in his eyes brittle. "I'm fine," he muttered, but his face betrayed him, taut, clouded with a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. A faint tremor shook his hand, and he gripped the counter, his breath hitching. Sophia's heart lurched. She'd overheard him mention dizzy spells to Lena once, a fleeting admission he'd brushed off. Ethan sat down, she said, her tone gentle but commanding, and guided him to a plush sofa. His face was drawn, his green eyes dimmed by something raw, unguarded. "It's one of those spells, isn't it?" she asked, kneeling beside him, her hands steadying his arm. He nodded, his jaw clenched. "It'll pass," he muttered, but his trembling hand betrayed the lie. She took the glass, holding it to his lips, her touch careful but unwavering. He drank, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, the room shrank, the air thickening with something unspoken. "You don't have to hide it from me," she said softly, her hand resting on his knee. "I'm here, Alexander. Deal or no deal." His breath caught, something shifting in his gaze, raw, unguarded, like a man seeing daylight after years in the dark. "You don't know what you're saying," he said, his voice low, almost a warning. But he didn't pull away, and the space between them closed, her warmth a quiet challenge to his walls. Sophia's heart thudded, her own words surprising her. She should have backed off, kept it formal, but the sight of him, strong yet fragile, stirred something fierce. "I know enough," she whispered, her hand sliding up his arm, tentative but bold. "You're not just a billionaire, Alexander. You're human." The word broke something in him. He reached for her, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "Sophia," he murmured, her name a confession. Then he kissed her, not the restrained peck from the ceremony, but a hungry, searching kiss that stole her breath. She leaned into it, her hands finding his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss deepened, a spark igniting into a blaze. Alexander pulled her closer, his hands sliding to her waist, lifting her onto his lap. The ivory dress bunched around her thighs, but neither cared. Her fingers tangled in his hair, and his lips trailed to her neck, a low groan escaping him as her warmth pressed against him. "I shouldn't want this," he whispered against her skin, his voice raw. "I shouldn't want you." "But you do," she said, her voice trembling but sure, her lips brushing his ear. "And I want you too." The admission shattered their restraint. Alexander stood, carrying her effortlessly to the bedroom, their lips never parting. The city lights filtered through the windows, bathing them in a soft glow as he lay her on the bed. Their movements were urgent yet tender, a dance of need and vulnerability. Her dress fell away, his shirt followed, and their skin met in a rush of heat. Every touch was a discovery, his hands mapping her curves, her sighs urging him closer. It was raw, intimate, a collision of two souls who'd expected nothing but a contract. As they moved together, the world outside ceased to exist. Alexander's hands were reverent, his whispers a mix of desire and disbelief. "You're more than I deserve," he breathed, his eyes locked on hers. Sophia felt her heart crack open. She didn't just want his touch, she wanted the man behind it, the one who hid his fear behind a billionaire's mask. Their rhythm was a shared pulse, each moment a vow unspoken. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, their breaths slowing, the silence heavy with what they'd done. Alexander's arm curled around her, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he said, his voice quiet but not cold. "Not like this." Sophia turned to face him, her cheek against his chest. "Maybe it was," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Maybe we're more than a deal." He didn't respond, but his grip tightened, a silent confession of a man wrestling with something deeper than their contract. The shadow of his diagnosis loomed, a reminder of the fragile ground they stood on. As sleep tugged at her, Sophia wondered if their passion was a bridge to something real, or a fleeting escape from their reality. Morning light spilled across the room, and Sophia woke alone, the bed cold where Alexander had been. She found him in the living room, staring out at Stamford's waterfront, a coffee mug in hand. His posture was rigid, his green eyes distant, as if the intimacy of last night had been locked away. "Morning," she said softly, pulling his shirt around her like a shield. He turned, his gaze softening briefly before hardening again. "We should talk about logistics," he said, his voice clipped, businesslike. "The doctor's visit is tomorrow. We need to confirm progress." His words were clinical, a stark contrast to the tenderness of hours ago. And Sophia felt a pang of doubt. Was he pulling back to protect himself, or had she misread him entirely? Before she could respond, a knock interrupted. Lena entered, her tablet glowing with updates. "Your mother's in town," she said, glancing at Sophia. "She wants to meet you both for lunch. And Victor's been calling, asking about the wedding." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Tell Victor to mind his own business. And my mother set it up." 1:00. Sophia's stomach churned. Victoria Harrington, Alexander's mother, was a legend in elite circles, a cold socialite who ruled her philanthropic empire with an iron fist. Sophia had seen her photo in Marcus's file. Sharp cheekbones, sharper eyes. Facing her felt like walking into a lion's den. She glanced at Alexander, searching for the man who'd held her last night, but his face was a mask of control. The weight of their wedding night, the fire that had burned between them, seemed to dissolve under his guarded demeanor. Yet the memory of his touch, his whispered confessions, lingered, a spark she couldn't extinguish. The sleek restaurant overlooking Stamford Harbor shimmered with elegance. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, a world away from the chipped formica of Rosie's diner. Sophia Ellis, now Mrs. Alexander Harrington, sat rigid, her champagne flute untouched, the weight of her new title pressing against her. The lunch with Alexander's mother, Victoria Harrington, loomed like a trial. Victoria, a formidable socialite whose philanthropy empire was as renowned as her cold precision, sat at the head of the table, her silver hair impeccable, her smile a blade. Beside her lounged Victor, Alexander's half-brother, his smirk ever present, his dark eyes glinting with malice. Alexander's hand rested on Sophia's knee under the table, a quiet reassurance, but his face was a mask of control, the warmth of their wedding night buried beneath a billionaire's armor. "Grace, is it?" Victoria began, her voice smooth but cutting, her eyes raking over Sophia. "You've certainly moved up quickly. From waitress to Mrs. Harrington in what, a month?" Sophia's cheeks burned, but she met Victoria's gaze, her voice steady. "I'm here for Alexander, not for a title." Victor snorted, swirling his wine. "Come on, Sophia. You expect us to believe you're not in it for the money. Alexander's got a ticking clock, and you're conveniently positioned to cash in." Alexander's hand tightened on her knee. His voice low and dangerous. "Enough, Victor." But Victor leaned closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "You're just a means to an end, sweetheart. Alexander's using you for his heir. You think he cares? I could give you a better life, real attention, not a contract." Sophia's blood boiled, her rejection swift. "I'd rather scrape by at the diner than take anything from you," she snapped, her eyes flashing. "You're not half the man Alexander is." Victor's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing, but Victoria's laugh cut through, cold and sharp. "Oh dear," she said, her gaze dissecting Sophia. "You're spirited, I'll give you that, but you're out of your depth. Alexander's world chews up girls like you." The words stung, planting a seed of doubt in Sophia's heart. She glanced at Alexander, searching for the man who'd held her last night, whose touch had set her ablaze, but he was staring at his mother, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, and her mind drifted to his avoidance that morning. Logistics, progress, no mention of feelings, no talk of his illness beyond a vague doctor's visit. Was Victor right? Was she just a tool for his legacy? Before she could spiral, Victoria struck again, her voice louder, meant for the nearby tables. "It's charming, really, how Alexander's taken in this charity case. But let's be honest, darling, you don't belong here. A diner girl in our world, it's almost comical." The restaurant seemed to hush, eyes turning toward them. Sophia's face burned, humiliation curling in her gut. She opened her mouth to respond, but Alexander stood, his chair scraping back, his voice a low growl that silenced the room. "That's enough, mother." He turned to Sophia, his eyes fierce with something raw, protective. "Sophia is my wife. She's more than any of you deserve, more than I deserve. You don't get to speak to her like that. Not now, not ever." The air crackled, Victoria's composure slipping for a fraction of a second. Victor's smirk vanished, and Sophia's breath caught, her heart pounding at Alexander's defense. He took her hand, pulling her to her feet. "We're done here," he said, his voice final, and led her out, leaving Victoria and Victor in stunned silence. Outside, the harbor breeze was cool, but Alexander's grip was warm, urgent. He stopped, turning to face her, his eyes searching hers. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "They're vultures, both of them. You didn't deserve that." Sophia's throat tightened, her doubts warring with the fire in his gaze. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Defend me like that." "Yes, I did," he said, stepping closer, his hand cupping her face. "You're not just a deal, Sophia. Not to me." The words were a confession, raw and unguarded, hitting her like a wave. She wanted to ask about his illness, about the walls he kept raising, but his touch, gentle yet fierce, silenced her questions. She leaned into him, her forehead against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. "I don't know what we're doing, Alexander," she whispered, "but I'm scared. I'm falling for you." He didn't answer, but his arms tightened around her, his silence a mix of comfort and restraint, as if her words had stirred something he wasn't ready to face. The sting of Victoria's humiliation and Victor's venom lingered, but Alexander's fierce defense had lit a spark in Sophia, a hope that their marriage was more than a transaction. Yet his avoidance of deeper truths, his illness, his fears, left a crack in that hope, one she couldn't ignore. Back at the penthouse, Sophia paced the living room, the city lights casting long shadows across the glass walls. Alexander sat at his desk, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp as he spoke to Lena about rescheduling meetings. The tenderness from the harbor was gone, replaced by the guarded billionaire she'd first met. She watched him, her mind replaying the lunch, Victoria's cutting words, Victor's insinuations. The doubt Victor had planted, "You're just a means to an end," gnawed at her. Was Alexander's defense genuine? Or was it another layer of control, a way to keep her tethered to his plan? She approached him, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Alexander, we need to talk." He hung up, his green eyes sharpening as he turned to her. "What's wrong?" he asked, rising, his tone laced with concern. She took a breath, her hands twisting together. "Your mother, Victor, they think I'm a gold digger. And sometimes, I wonder if they're right. You say I'm not just a deal, but you keep shutting me out. Your illness, these spells, you won't talk about them. Am I just here for your air?" His jaw tightened, but his eyes softened, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Sophia," he said, stepping closer, "you're not just anything. I meant what I said at lunch. You're more than they'll ever understand." He reached for her hand, his touch warm, grounding. "I'm not good at this, opening up. The diagnosis. It's changed everything. I'm trying to protect you, not push you away." His voice cracked, a rare vulnerability breaking through. She searched his face, wanting to believe him, but the crack of doubt remained. "I want to trust you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I need more than words. I need you to let me in." He nodded, his thumb brushing her knuckles, a silent promise. "I'll try," he said, his voice low. "Just give me time." She nodded, her heart torn between hope and fear. The memory of their wedding night, the fire that had burned between them, was still vivid, but so was his coldness that morning. As he pulled her close, his warmth a contrast to the uncertainty, Sophia felt the weight of their fragile bond, a partnership teetering on the edge of something deeper, something neither was ready to name. Sophia Ellis sat in the stark white bathroom of the penthouse, her hands trembling as she stared at the pregnancy test in her grip. Two pink lines stared back, bold and undeniable. Her heart raced, a torrent of joy and fear flooding her senses. She was pregnant. Alexander Harrington's heir, the cornerstone of their whirlwind marriage, was real. 3 weeks had passed since their wedding, a blur of passion and tension, marked by his fierce defense at the disastrous lunch with his mother, Victoria, and his venomous half-brother, Victor. His words by the harbor, "You're not just a deal, Sophia," echoed in her mind, but so did his evasions, his refusal to speak of the dizzy spells or the illness he believed would claim him in 3 years. She tucked the test into her pocket, her mind replaying his touch, his raw confession, and the questions he still wouldn't answer. She found Alexander in his office, a sleek space of glass and steel overlooking Stamford's waterfront. His desk was scattered with papers, his brow furrowed as he typed, the weight of his empire evident in his tense posture. The sight of him, strong yet haunted, tugged at her heart. "Alexander," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves knotting her stomach, "we need to talk." He looked up, his green eyes sharpening, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "What's wrong?" he asked, rising, his tone laced with urgency. She took a deep breath, pulled the test from her pocket, and placed it on the desk. "I'm pregnant." For a moment he froze, his gaze locked on the test, the room silent save for the distant hum of the city. Then a smile broke across his face, raw and unguarded, transforming him into someone younger, lighter. "Sophia," he breathed, crossing the room in 2 strides to pull her into his arms. We did it." His voice cracked, joy mingling with something heavier, relief perhaps, or fear. He kissed her forehead, his hands framing her face, and for a moment, the shadow of his diagnosis seemed to lift. But as he held her, Sophia caught a flicker of dread in his eyes, a reminder of the clock he believed was ticking. "You're happy," she said softly, searching his face, "but you're still scared, aren't you? About your illness." His smile faded, his hands dropping to her shoulders. "I'm fine," he said too quickly, his tone shutting the door on her question. "Let's focus on this, on you, on the baby." His deflection stung, widening the crack of doubt Victor's taunts had planted at lunch. She wanted to push, to demand answers, but his warmth, his rare vulnerability, held her back. Instead, she nodded, letting the moment pass, though unease lingered like a bruise. Days later, at a routine checkup in the private hospital where Alexander had received his diagnosis, Sophia sat in the waiting room, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Alexander was with Dr. Reynolds, discussing his condition, and her unease grew. His refusal to talk about his illness, his quick shifts to logistics or the baby, felt like a wall she couldn't breach. As she waited, she overheard two doctors in the hallway, their voices low but clear. "Reynolds is still pushing the degenerative narrative," one said, his tone skeptical. "But the scans don't add up. Harrington's symptoms are textbook stress, not terminal." Sophia's heart stopped. She leaned closer, hidden by a potted plant, as the second doctor replied, "You think it's the brother?" "Victor's been sniffing around." The words hit like a thunderbolt. Her mind raced, piecing together Victor's taunts, his hints that Alexander was using her, his presence at every turn. Was it possible? Could Alexander's diagnosis, the foundation of their marriage, be a lie? Rage and disbelief churned within her, but a flicker of hope emerged. Alexander might not be dying. She slipped out of the hospital, her pulse pounding, determined to find answers. That night, while Alexander was at a late meeting, she made a call. She'd found a doctor in Greenwich, Dr. Mia Singh, known for her discretion and independence. Sophia drove to her office the next day, a sleek clinic tucked in a quiet corner of the town. She handed over Alexander's medical records, obtained through a favor from Lena, and waited, her fingers twisting in her lap. Dr. Singh reviewed the files, her brow furrowing. "Mrs. Harrington," she said finally, her voice calm but firm, "your husband's symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, are consistent with chronic stress, possibly exacerbated by dehydration or overwork. There's no evidence of a degenerative illness. These scans," she tapped the screen, "have been manipulated. Someone wanted him to believe he was dying." Sophia's breath caught, her world tilting. "Manipulated by who?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I can't say for certain," Dr. Singh replied. "But someone with access to his medical team could have orchestrated this. It's not uncommon in high-stakes families." Victor, his name burned in Sophia's mind, his smirk at the wedding, his whispered poison at the lunch. He'd hinted at a better life, but this, faking Alexander's illness to steal his empire, was monstrous. Rage and betrayal churned within her, but so did relief. Alexander wasn't dying. The man she was falling for, the father of her child, had a future. She drove back to Stamford, her hands gripping the wheel, torn between confronting Alexander and exposing Victor. Doubt gnawed at her. Did Alexander suspect? Was his secrecy a sign he knew more than he let on? She parked outside the penthouse, the harbor's waves glinting under the moon, a mirror to the turmoil inside her. She touched her stomach, grounding herself in the life growing there, and made a choice. She'd tell Alexander the truth, but not tonight, not until she had proof to bury Victor. As she stepped into the penthouse, Alexander was waiting, his tie loosened, his eyes soft but shadowed. "You're late," he said, crossing to her, his hand brushing her arm. "Everything okay?" Sophia forced a smile, her heart racing with the weight of her discovery. "Just needed air," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "We'll talk tomorrow, okay?" He nodded, pulling her close, his warmth a contrast to the cold truth she carried. Her hand rested on her stomach, the life within grounding her resolve. She'd protect him, their child, and the fragile love they'd begun to build. But first, she needed evidence. The next morning, Sophia woke to the scent of coffee and the sight of Alexander at the kitchen island, his laptop open, his brow furrowed. The vulnerability from last night was gone, replaced by the guarded billionaire she'd first met. "You're up early," he said, his green eyes flicking to her, softening briefly before returning to his screen. "Just restless," she replied, echoing her excuse from the night before. The weight of Dr. Singh's words pressed against her, but she needed proof, something concrete to confront Alexander with. She kissed his cheek, a fleeting touch to mask her unease, and left for the day, claiming errands. Instead, she met Marcus, Alexander's investigator, at a small cafe in Stamford's East Side. His loyalty was to Alexander, but Sophia's determination and a promise to keep it quiet convinced him to dig into Victor's dealings with Dr. Reynolds. By evening, Marcus delivered a thin envelope, bank records, emails, and a recorded call between Victor and Dr. Reynolds discussing payments to falsify Alexander's scans. Sophia's hands shook as she read, rage and relief warring within her. Alexander wasn't dying, but Victor's betrayal cut deeper than she'd imagined. A plot to break his brother's spirit and steal his empire. Sophia Ellis clutched the thin envelope from Marcus, her hands trembling as she stood in the small cafe on Stamford's east side. The damning evidence inside, bank records, emails, a recorded call between Victor and Dr. Reynolds, burned like a live coal. Alexander Harrington, her husband, wasn't dying. The degenerative illness that had driven their whirlwind marriage, the ticking clock that had fueled his desperate need for an heir, was a lie. Dr. Mia Singh's words echoed in her mind. The scans have been manipulated. Someone wanted him to believe he was dying. Victor's name seared her thoughts. His smirk at the wedding, his venomous taunts at the lunch with Victoria, his whispered offer of a better life. He'd orchestrated a monstrous betrayal to break Alexander's spirit and seize his empire. Rage and relief warred within her, but the weight of the truth pressed harder. She had to tell Alexander, but first she needed to face him with proof that would bury Victor. She returned to the penthouse as dusk painted the sky in hues of fire. Alexander was pacing the living room, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp. "No, Lena, I don't care what he says. Victor doesn't get a say in the board's vote." He hung up as Sophia entered, his green eyes narrowing at her expression. "Sophia, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." She set the envelope on the coffee table, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "We need to talk, Alexander, now." She gestured to the envelope. "This is about your diagnosis. It's not real." He froze, his face a mask of confusion. "What are you talking about?" Sophia took a breath, her words rushing out. "I saw Dr. Mia Singh in Greenwich. She reviewed your records. Your symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, are stress, not a degenerative illness. Someone faked the scans. It was Victor, Alexander. He paid Dr. Reynolds to make you think you were dying, to push you out, to take your place." Alexander's eyes darkened, his jaw clenching as he grabbed the envelope, scanning the documents. His hands trembled, the truth sinking in like a blade. The recorded call played, Victor's voice clear. "Make it convincing, Reynolds. He needs to believe he's got no time left." Alexander's face paled, betrayal etching lines where joy had been days ago. "No," he whispered, sinking onto the sofa. "All this time, I thought." He looked at Sophia, his eyes raw. "I built my life around a lie." She knelt beside him, her hand on his, her voice soft but firm. "I'm so sorry, Alexander. I had to know the truth, for you, for us, for..." Her hand drifted to her stomach, and his gaze followed, softening at the reminder of their unborn child. Before he could respond, the penthouse door burst open. Victor stormed in, his face twisted with fury, his dark hair disheveled. "You little witch!" He spat at Sophia, his eyes blazing. "You couldn't leave it alone, could you? Digging into things that don't concern you." Sophia stood, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "You tried to destroy him, Victor. Your own brother. For what? Money? Power?" Victor laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think you're saving him? You're nothing but a pawn, Sophia, a diner girl who got lucky. You've ruined my life exposing this." Alexander surged to his feet, his presence towering, his voice a low growl. "You're done, Victor." But before he could say more, Victor lunged, his hand swinging toward Sophia's face. She flinched, stepping back, but his fingers grazed her cheek, a sharp sting that left her gasping. Time froze, her hand flying to her cheek, shock rooting her in place. Alexander roared, a sound of pure rage, and grabbed Victor by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "Touch her again, and you're done," he snarled, his voice cold, lethal, his glare cutting through his brother like ice. "You're nothing, Victor, a coward who'd sell out his own blood." Victor struggled, his smirk gone, replaced by desperation. "You think you've won? You'll always be the sick one, Alexander, heir or not." Alexander's arm tightened around Sophia's waist, pulling her close, his body a shield. "Get out," he said, his voice deadly calm. "And if I ever see you near my wife again, You'll wish you'd never been born." Victor stumbled back, his eyes darting between them, then fled, the door slamming behind him. Sophia's breath shook, her cheek stinging, but Alexander's arm grounded her. He turned her to face him, his fingers gentle as they brushed her cheek, inspecting the faint red mark. "He'll never touch you again," he vowed, his voice low, fierce. "No one will. I swear it, Sophia." Her eyes filled, not from pain but from the protectiveness in his gaze, the depth of his promise. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice breaking, "not of him, but of losing you, of this being a lie." Alexander pulled her into his arms, his forehead against hers. "It's not a lie," he said, his voice raw. "You, the baby, us, it's real. More real than anything I've ever known." She clung to him, the truth of his health a fragile hope, but Victor's betrayal a wound still bleeding. In his arms, she felt the stirrings of something stronger, a love worth fighting for. Alexander's breath was warm against her skin, his voice a low rumble. "I need you to know," he said, pulling back to meet her eyes. "You saved me, Sophia, not just from Victor's lies, but from myself." His green eyes were unguarded, stripped of the billionaire's mask, and her throat tightened at the vulnerability there. "You don't have to say that," she whispered, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a heart no longer bound by a death sentence. "I just wanted the truth." He shook his head, his fingers brushing her cheek, careful to avoid the faint mark. "It's more than that. I was dying inside long before the diagnosis, building an empire, chasing control, shutting everyone out. Then you came, and—" he paused, his voice catching. "You gave me a reason to live." The words hit her like a wave, washing away the doubts Victor had planted, the coldness of their deal, the fear of being a means to an end. Sophia's eyes filled, her breath hitching as she searched his face. "Alexander," she said, her voice trembling, "I was so scared I'd lose you, not to the illness, but to whatever this is. I didn't expect to love you." His gaze softened, a smile breaking through, raw and real. "You love me?" he asked, his voice low, almost disbelieving. She nodded, a tear spilling over. "I do, I think I have for a while." His response was a kiss, slow, deliberate, a promise woven into every brush of his lips. Sophia melted into him, her hands sliding up his back, pulling him closer as the world narrowed to the heat of his touch. The penthouse, the city, Victor's betrayal, all faded, leaving only them. The weight of the truth, the evidence in the envelope, grounded her. But his embrace lifted her, a fragile hope solidified by their shared confession. As they stood there, entwined, Sophia felt the life within her stir, a reminder of the future they could now claim, one free from the shadow of a false prognosis, but still shadowed by Victor's lingering threat. Sophia Ellis stood in the penthouse, the city lights of Stamford shimmering beyond the glass walls, a constellation of hope and tension. The confrontation with Victor had left her shaken, the sting of his graze on her cheek a fading echo. But Alexander Harrington's fierce protection burned brighter. His vow, "He'll never touch you again," rang in her ears, a promise that anchored her against the betrayal they'd uncovered. The envelope of evidence lay on the coffee table, its contents, bank records, emails, a recorded call between Victor and Dr. Reynolds, proof that Alexander's diagnosis of a degenerative illness was a lie, a cruel plot to break him and steal his empire. Sophia's heart swelled with relief that Alexander wasn't dying. But Victor's betrayal cut deep, a wound that bled into the fragile love growing between them. Alexander's arms were still around her, his forehead pressed to hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I need you to know," he said, pulling back to meet her eyes, his voice raw. "You saved me, Sophia, not just from Victor's lies, but from myself." His green eyes were unguarded, the billionaire's mask gone, revealing a man stripped bare by truth and vulnerability. Sophia's throat tightened, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a heart no longer bound by a death sentence. "You don't have to say that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just wanted the truth." He shook his head, his fingers brushing her cheek, careful to avoid the faint mark from Victor's attack.
It's more than that. I was dying inside long before the diagnosis, building an empire, chasing control, shutting everyone out. Then you came, and—" He paused, his voice catching, a crack in his armor. "The doctor said I was dying, but you gave me a reason to live." The words hit her like a wave, washing away the doubts Victor had planted, the coldness of their deal, the fear of being a means to an end. Sophia's eyes filled, her breath hitching as she searched his face. "Alexander," she said, her voice breaking, "I was so scared I'd lose you, not to the illness, but to whatever this is. I didn't expect to love you." His gaze softened, a smile breaking through, raw and real. "You love me?" he asked, his voice low, almost disbelieving. She nodded, a tear spilling over. "I do. I think I have for a while." His response was a kiss, not the hungry fire of their wedding night or the restrained peck of their ceremony, but something deeper, slow, deliberate, a promise woven into every brush of his lips. Sophia melted into him, her hands sliding up his back, pulling him closer as the world narrowed to the heat of his touch. The penthouse, the city, Victor's betrayal, all faded, leaving only them. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the bedroom, their lips never parting. The city lights cast a soft glow through the windows, painting their skin in silver and shadow. Alexander set her on the bed, his hands reverent as they traced her curves, peeling away her clothes with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "You're everything," he murmured, his lips grazing her collarbone, her shoulder, her throat. "Everything I didn't know I needed." Sophia's breath hitched, her fingers tangling in his hair as she pulled him closer. "Show me," she whispered, her voice bold despite the vulnerability in her eyes. "Show me this is real." He did. Their lovemaking was a dance of raw love, unbound by contracts or deadlines. Every touch was a confession, his hands mapping her body, her sighs urging him deeper. There was no urgency, only a shared hunger to savor each moment, to claim each other fully. Alexander's whispers filled the air, her name, promises, truths he'd held back too long. "I love you," he said against her skin, the words a vow as their bodies moved together, a rhythm that felt like forever. Sophia felt cherished, desired in a way she'd never known. The walls she'd built, her fear of being used, of not belonging in his world, crumbled under his touch. His eyes held hers, fierce and tender, and she saw the man she'd fallen for, not the billionaire, but Alexander, flawed and human, hers. As they reached their peak, her hands clutched his, their fingers entwined, and the world felt right, safe, whole. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, their breaths slowing, the city's hum a soft undercurrent. Alexander's arm draped over her, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her hip. Sophia rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, a sound she'd feared she'd lose. "I feel safe with you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "like I can finally breathe." His arm tightened, his lips brushing her forehead. "You are safe," he said, his voice low, resolute. "I'll spend my life making sure of it. You, the baby, us, this is my world now." Sophia smiled, her heart swelling, but a flicker of unease lingered. Victor was still out there, his fury a loose thread that could unravel their fragile peace. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on Alexander's warmth and the life growing inside her. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. "No diagnosis, no deadline. What do we do?" He tilted her chin up, his eyes gleaming with a fire she hadn't seen before. "We live, Sophia. We build a life, not for an empire, not for a legacy, but for us." He paused, his thumb brushing her lips. "I want every moment with you. Every laugh, every fight, every quiet night like this." Her heart ached with the weight of his words, the promise of a future they'd almost lost. She kissed him, soft and slow, sealing their vow. "I want that too," she said, her voice steady. "All of it." As they drifted toward sleep, the city lights flickering like stars beyond the glass, Sophia felt a peace she'd never known. Victor's shadow loomed, a distant threat, but here in Alexander's arms, she was cherished, desired, loved.
The greatest romance of his life was hers too, a bond forged in truth and fire. The next morning, Sophia woke to the scent of coffee and the sight of Alexander at the kitchen island, his laptop open, his brow furrowed. The vulnerability of the night was tempered by his return to the guarded billionaire, but his eyes softened as they met hers. "Morning," he said, a faint smile breaking through. "You sleep okay?" She nodded, pulling his shirt around her, the fabric a comfort against her skin. "Just thinking," she said, her voice light but her mind heavy with the need to address Victor's betrayal. "We need to deal with him," she said, her tone firm. "Victor can't just walk away from this." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he nodded, his hand reaching for hers. "I know. I've already called Marcus. We'll take this to the board, strip him of everything, his shares, his influence. He won't hurt us again." His voice was resolute, but Sophia saw the pain in his eyes, the wound of a brother's betrayal. She squeezed his hand, grounding him as he'd grounded her. "We'll do it together," she said, her voice steady. "For us, for the baby." Their plan took shape over the next days, a quiet resolve binding them closer. Marcus gathered more evidence, tightening the noose around Victor's schemes. Sophia felt the weight of their unborn child, a beacon of hope amidst the storm. Alexander's love, declared in the heat of their passion, was a vow she clung to. But Victor's lingering threat kept her vigilant. As they prepared to confront him, Sophia knew their love was stronger than his malice, a fire that would burn through any shadow. Sophia Ellis stood beside Alexander Harrington in the sleek boardroom of the Harborview Hotel, the same room where his dizzy spells had once shaken his confidence. Now, it was a battleground for truth. The polished conference table gleamed under the morning light, and the panoramic view of Stamford's skyline framed a moment of reckoning. The envelope of evidence, bank records, emails, a recorded call between Victor and Dr. Reynolds, lay before them, proof that Alexander's supposed degenerative illness was a lie orchestrated to break him and steal his empire. Sophia's hand rested on her stomach, the life growing within her a quiet anchor as they prepared to confront Victor. Alexander's jaw was set, his green eyes blazing with a fire that belied the pain of his brother's betrayal. Their love, forged in the fire of truth and passion, bound them tighter than ever. But Victor's shadow loomed as a final hurdle to their peace. The board members filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Victor sauntered in last, his dark hair slicked back, his smirk faltering as he caught sight of the envelope. Alexander stood, his presence commanding, his voice cold and unyielding. "You're done, Victor," he said, sliding the documents across the table. "You tried to break me, to steal everything, but you underestimated me, and Sophia." Victor's eyes darted to the envelope, his charm cracking as he scanned the evidence. His face twisted, desperation replacing his usual arrogance. "You can't do this, Alexander," he said, his voice sharp. "I'm family." "You stopped being family the moment you paid Reynolds to lie," Alexander shot back, his tone cutting like steel. The board members leaned forward, their silence heavy as Alexander presented the evidence. Bank transfers tracing payments to Dr. Reynolds, emails detailing the plot, and the damning recording. Victor's voice clear. "Make it convincing, Reynolds. He needs to believe he's got no time left." Gasps rippled through the room, the board members' faces hardening. Victor's hands clenched, his voice rising. "This is a setup. You've got nothing on me." Sophia stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "It's over, Victor. You hurt him, used me, tried to destroy us, but we're stronger than your lies." Her hazel eyes met his, unflinching, and for the first time, Victor's smirk vanished completely. Alexander's hand found hers under the table, a silent tether, his touch grounding her as it had in their most vulnerable moments. The board voted swiftly, and their decision was unanimous. Victor's shares were stripped, his stake in the Harrington Empire erased, and his name expunged from the legacy. He was escorted out, his threats drowned by the closing of the boardroom doors, sent to face a life without the power he'd craved. Dr. Reynolds faced a harsher reckoning, A recent article from the Stamford Advocate, which Sophia had read that morning, detailed his fall. His medical license was revoked after an ethics board investigation confirmed his role in falsifying Alexander's records. The news spread quickly, hospitals blacklisting him, his reputation shredded, a cautionary tale of greed. Alexander watched the reports from his office later that day, his jaw tight but his heart lighter. The lies that had haunted him were gone, replaced by the truth Sophia had fought for. Yet the victory felt hollow without her by his side. She was his anchor, her strength softening the edges of his once cold world. They had moved into a sprawling estate just outside Stamford, its gardens a haven where Sophia could breathe, free from the city's weight. The cherry blossom trees, now in full bloom, drifted across the lawn, their petals a soft promise of renewal. One spring morning, as Sophia stood in the kitchen, her hand on her 8-month pregnant belly, a sharp pain cut through her. Her water broke, a sudden rush that sent her heart racing. Alexander was at her side in an instant, his green eyes wide with a mix of nerves and joy. "You've got this," he whispered, kissing her knuckles as he drove her to the hospital. "We've got this." The labor was long and grueling, but Sophia was fierce, her strength a quiet fire that left Alexander in awe. He stayed by her side, his hand never leaving hers, his voice a steady anchor through each contraction. When their son was born, a healthy boy with Alexander's green eyes and Sophia's stubborn chin, Alexander's breath caught, tears spilling as he held the tiny bundle. Sophia, exhausted but radiant, reached for his hand, her smile a beacon. "Look at him," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Our boy." Alexander cradled their son, named Noah, against his chest, his tears falling freely as he looked at Sophia. "You gave me everything," he said, his voice raw. "Not just him, but you." They returned to the estate, the gardens alive with Noah's cries and Sophia's laughter. Alexander, once the cold billionaire obsessed with control, was transformed. He woke early to change diapers, sang off-key lullabies, and stole moments to dance with Sophia in the kitchen, Noah nestled in a sling against her chest. The empire still called, but he delegated, his priorities reshaped. He lived passionately now, each day a celebration of the life he'd almost lost to Victor's lies. Sophia, too, found a new rhythm, her fears of not belonging in his world fading with every shared moment, every touch that spoke of love. One evening, as summer painted the sky in hues of gold, they sat on the estate's terrace, Noah asleep in a bassinet beside them. The air was warm, scented with lavender, and Sophia leaned against Alexander, her head on his shoulder. The city skyline glimmered in the distance, a reminder of the world they'd left behind. But here, in this moment, they were whole. Alexander's hand found hers, his fingers tracing the wedding band he'd slipped on her finger months ago. No longer a symbol of a deal, but of a love hard won. "I thought I was dying," he whispered, his lips brushing her ear, his voice soft but steady. "But you taught me how to live, Sophia. You and Noah, you're my life now." Sophia turned to him, her hazel eyes shimmering with tears and love. "And you're mine," she said, her voice a vow. She kissed him, slow and deep, a promise of forever in every touch. Noah stirred, a soft coo breaking the silence, and they laughed, their hands entwined over his tiny form. Victor's schemes were reduced to ash, and Dr. Reynolds was a forgotten footnote in their triumph. Sophia felt safe, cherished, and desired, not as a means to an end, but as Alexander's partner, his love, and his home. The weight of their journey, the false diagnosis, the betrayal, the fire of their love, had forged something unbreakable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fire and shadow, Alexander pulled Sophia closer, Noah's soft breaths a lullaby between them. The future stretched before them, not a deadline but a canvas, ready for their love to fill. The harbor's waves, faint in the distance, carried the last of their fears away, leaving only the rhythm of their shared heartbeat, a family, a love, a life reclaimed. Sophia Ellis stood on the terrace of their sprawling estate just outside Stamford, the summer sky ablaze with hues of gold and crimson. The air was warm, scented with lavender, and the distant city skyline glimmered like a memory of the world they'd left behind. Beside her, Noah slept peacefully in his bassinet, his tiny chest rising and falling, a perfect blend of Alexander Harrington's green eyes and Sophia's stubborn chin. Months had passed since the boardroom showdown that stripped Victor of his power, since the truth of Alexander's false diagnosis, a cruel lie orchestrated by his half-brother and Dr. Reynolds, had set them free. The weight of that betrayal had faded, replaced by the rhythm of their new life, a life built on love, trust, and the family they'd created. Sophia's hand rested on the bassinet, her heart full. Yet a quiet vigilance lingered. Victor's shadow, though diminished, was a reminder of the battles they'd fought. Alexander joined her, his presence steady, his arm slipping around her waist as he pulled her close. His touch, once a spark that ignited their whirlwind marriage, was now a constant warmth, a vow renewed with every glance. The estate's gardens stretched before them, cherry blossoms long gone, but replaced by vibrant summer blooms, a testament to the renewal they'd found together. Noah stirred, a soft coo breaking the silence, and they laughed, their hands entwining over his tiny form. "I thought I was dying," Alexander whispered, his lips brushing her ear, his voice soft but resolute. "But you taught me how to live, Sophia. You and Noah. You're my life now." Sophia turned to him, her hazel eyes shimmering with tears and love. "And you're mine," she said, her voice a vow as she kissed him, slow and deep, a promise of forever in every touch. The journey to this moment had been a storm. Victor's betrayal, the false prognosis, the fiery passion that had turned a deal into a love worth fighting for. But here, on this terrace, they were whole, their shared heartbeat a rhythm stronger than any threat. The harbor's waves, faint in the distance, carried away the last echoes of their fears, leaving only the life they'd reclaimed. Months earlier, the birth of Noah had marked a turning point. Sophia's labor had been long, grueling, but Alexander never left her side, his hand gripping hers, his voice a steady anchor through each contraction. "You've got this," he'd whispered, kissing her knuckles as they wheeled her into delivery. "We've got this." When Noah arrived, healthy and squalling, Alexander's tears fell freely, his breath catching as he held his son for the first time. Sophia, exhausted but radiant, had reached for his hand, her smile a beacon. "Look at him," she'd whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Our boy." Alexander had cradled Noah against his chest, his tears falling as he looked at Sophia. "You gave me everything," he'd said, his voice raw. "Not just him, but you." The hospital room had faded, replaced by the estate's warmth, alive with Noah's cries and Sophia's laughter. Alexander, once the cold billionaire obsessed with control, had transformed. He woke early to change diapers, sang off-key lullabies, and stole moments to dance with Sophia in the kitchen, Noah nestled in a sling against her chest. The empire still called, but he delegated, his priorities reshaped. He lived passionately now, each day a celebration of the life he'd almost lost to Victor's lies. Sophia, too, had found a new rhythm, her fears of not belonging in his world dissolving with every shared moment, every touch that spoke of love. The boardroom confrontation had been a cleansing fire. Alexander had stood tall, presenting the evidence, bank records, emails, Victor's damning voice on the recording, to the board. "You're done, Victor," he'd said, his voice unyielding. "You tried to break me, but you underestimated me, and Sophia." Victor's desperation had crumbled, his shares stripped, his name erased from the Harrington legacy. Dr. Reynolds's fall had been swifter, his medical license revoked, his reputation shredded by the Stamford Advocate's exposé. The public disgrace was a footnote in their triumph, a victory that felt hollow without Sophia by Alexander's side. She was his anchor, her strength softening the edges of his once guarded heart. Now, as they sat on the terrace, the weight of their journey, the false diagnosis, the betrayal, the fire of their love, had forged something unbreakable. Alexander's hand traced the wedding band on Sophia's finger, no longer a symbol of a deal but of a love hard won. "I never thought I'd have this," he said, his voice low, his eyes gleaming with a fire that matched the sunset. "A family, a home. You." Sophia leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, the warmth of his embrace a shield against the world. "You gave me a future I didn't dare dream of," she said, her voice steady. "Emma's safe, Noah's here, and you're everything." Emma, now thriving in her first year of art school, funded by Alexander's promise, had visited that morning, her laughter filling the estate. Sophia's heart swelled at the memory of her sister's joy, free from the weight of their past struggles. The sacrifices Sophia had made, double shifts, sleepless nights, had led to this moment, a life where love and security intertwined. Alexander's empire, once his sole focus, had taken a backseat to stolen glances, to the weight of Noah in his arms, to the woman who'd rewritten his story. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fire and shadow, Alexander pulled Sophia closer, his lips brushing her temple. The future stretched before them, not a deadline but a canvas, ready for their love to fill. Noah's soft breaths were a lullaby, grounding them in the present. Sophia's hand rested on her stomach, a quiet gratitude for the life they'd created, a life that had begun as a deal but blossomed into something eternal. Victor's schemes were ash, Dr. Reynolds a forgotten echo, but their love burned brighter, a flame that no betrayal could extinguish. They rose, Alexander lifting the bassinet with care, and moved inside, the estate's warmth enveloping them. In the nursery, they tucked Noah into his crib, his tiny hand curling around Sophia's finger. Alexander stood behind her, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "We're a family," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll spend every day making sure you both know it." Sophia turned in his arms, her lips finding his in a kiss that spoke of promises kept, of battles won, of a love that had defied the odds. As they stepped back into the living room, the city lights flickering beyond the windows, Sophia felt a peace she'd never known. The diner, the spilled wine, the cold contract, they were distant memories, chapters in a story that had led to this. Alexander's hand found hers, their fingers entwining, and she knew this was home, not the estate, not the empire, but him, Noah, them. The greatest romance of his life was hers too, a bond forged in truth, tested by fire and sealed by love. The harbor's waves carried away the last of their fears, leaving only the rhythm of their shared heartbeat, a family, a love, a life reclaimed.